Welcome to the Brain People Podcast, a show where four mental health experts team up to bring you practical tools for overcoming mental health challenges. The Brain People don't replace your doctor or therapist, but we will give you some extra tools to help you on your journey. So join us as we fight mental illness, one episode at a time. Welcome to the Brain People Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Binus, and today, I should say, I'm a psychiatrist. And today I'm joined by my co-host,
Dr. Katie Cruz, and a licensed clinical psychologist.
All right, today we are going to have a riveting topic that I think will be very practical and something that even as Dr. Katie and I were talking beforehand, is very thought-provoking. And I think it will be practical for all of us to consider how we can make friends with our emotions. And we don't even want to be frenemies. We want to be true friends, right, Dr. Katie?
Yes.
So let's start off just by talking a little bit about emotions. Why should we even talk about emotions? Why is this an important topic?
For many reasons. So first one, so much of our mental health challenges and difficulties and disorders are related to not coping well with emotions or even complete suppression or avoidance. So maybe choose a couple of disorders and you can think immediately of like the connection between the disorder and the suppression or avoidance of emotions. I think of PTSD, right? We often call it a non-recovery diagnosis because if they had allowed themselves to process and experience those emotions, they would have healed, they would have recovered naturally. And so that's an example I think about my patients with panic disorder. They haven't learned to cope with anxiety, often to a point where with panic attacks, it accumulates to a point of explosion. And just a lot of different ones, OCD, trying to control in a different way than to be able to manage those emotions themselves, and the list could go on.
Yeah, and I'm thinking as you're talking, because a lot of what you're really looking at is more the anxiety spectrum and kind of almost this suppression of emotion or denial that it's even there, and then it kind of almost forms this life of its own, if you will. What about, some of the other ones that we almost might think about is having almost, I don't know if I want to say too low, but negative emotion like depression, for example.
Depression oftentimes people consider as internalized anger, right? Where you're maybe in that case suppressing anger to a point where your body comes to a point of hopelessness and helplessness. I just had a client this past week where his depression was really clearly anger, but not being able to communicate or manage the anger. And so this lack of power and control, he just started to give up and retreat. So even, with depression, it can be connected to an avoidance or lack of ability to cope with
really
emotions.
Identify and then deal with it in a healthy way. And that was one of the big things they used to say, especially in the old school psychological communities. They would say depression is anger turned inward. Now, of course, nowadays we know that can be part of it. It's not the whole picture. And there's certainly other biological factors that play a role and multitude of things. But good point, that whole anger piece. So now when we think about emotions, sometimes, we blame those emotions and we say, well, I have OCD because of, my high anxiety about this, or, I have PTSD because it was such a scary event or whatever. I guess, and then oftentimes too, people just feel like emotions, whether it's anxiety or sadness or anger, that's why I'm sick, because my emotions are just bad, and so the question in my mind is, are the emotions really the problem?
So definitely not so. But before we get there, just let me mention a couple of other things why we need to talk about emotions. Because we're talking about mental health, but also there's a lot of, and I'm not going to go into this into depth, but there's a lot of physical health conditions that are also linked to suppressed emotions. And there's a lot of work done. And then I wanted to emphasize this because I think we even had a conversation on a road trip once of going to do some public speaking, that even the field of mental health is kind of perpetuating this view that emotions are bad.
Mm-hmm.
That many times we're so focused on the symptoms. So just using depression, anxiety, for example, sometimes doctors talk about, you wouldn't give a diagnosis of chest pain because it doesn't tell you what the root is.
Right.
But we have depression, anxiety many times as the problem. And then here we come both with diagnosis and treatment of ways to get rid of the depression, anxiety, even with sometimes therapy. I'm not just talking about medication management, sometimes muting those symptoms or muting the emotions, but even with therapy, we're teaching people skills to quickly get rid of the anxiety.
Yes.
And all of this shows that we don't have a good view of emotions in a way that allows for people to actually manage it well. So mental health problems, physical health problems, the mental health field at times, and then we're living in a world full of addictions. And that too demonstrates that we need to be talking about emotions because many people are using the addictions to numb or escape the emotion.
Just to shut it down, right?
Yeah.
And even I'm thinking about, of course we talk about thought blocking sometimes with CBT, but even like emotion blocking with techniques that we sometimes use, like, it doesn't feel comfortable. So whatever feels uncomfortable, instead of me getting closer to that, let me just try to get rid of it so I can move on and feel good, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that can perpetuate the problem. One thing that you're talking that I'm thinking about, sometimes I use the analogy when I'm thinking about, the logical part of our brain and then the emotional part of our brain as the parents and the kids. The logical part of our brain being kind of like the good parents, and then the kids being like the emotions, right? And so if we take this analogy in the context of what we're talking about today, it's kind of like, well, telling the kids and just being like, you just need to shut up, like be seen, be not heard, right?
Yes.
And what does that do then to the child, right? And is that really the best way to deal with the child, or are there better ways to actually help the children to grow and all of that?
And that's also part of the societal view of emotions that is in everything. Like when you really hear people talk about emotions, even in a better way, like what you just described, I'd be a little bit careful to say that because people will take that and think, okay, the parents, logical brain, that's the good part of your brain. And a lot of people then internalize that and think, I need to be more logical and less emotional. And this is where DBT talks about the wise mind, where it's not the logic versus the emotions. It's the combination of the logical mind and the emotional mind to make wisdom, where emotions are actually your friends with, in combination, right, using the whole brain, not just the left or the right or the top or the downstairs brain. It's putting it all together. And you hear it with society a lot, that emotions are like, the kids that you need to control and make them, shut up. I know you're not saying that.
Right.
But kids have a lot of creativity and other things that the parents need to listen to as well.
Right. Now, one question I would have there, though, and I appreciate you mentioning this, isn't there at the end of the day a part of the mind that kind of ultimately needs to have the final say, so to speak? And like you said, that's kind of, I guess, would be the wise mind, like bringing those two together. But ultimately, in my mind, I'm wondering, where is that hierarchy in this situation? And again, not saying emotions are bad, but any thoughts that you have on that?
Yeah, and that's definitely, thinking about the final say.
Yes.
But this also happens in conversations with husband and wife. Just because the leader, oftentimes the husband, makes the final say, it actually doesn't mean that he's better. My mom used to say, yes, your dad's the head, but I'm the neck that moves him, right? And actually, women have a lot of say in that. So emotions have a lot of say. And so when we overemphasize logic, we don't say that they're making the final decisions. We just say, oh, it's better than emotions. And I think that's where really this negative view of emotion is being perpetuated throughout society and even in mental health.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I mean, maybe we've already kind of answered this question. I don't know if you have further thoughts that you wanted to expound on this idea, are emotions really the problem? I think we're starting to understand as we're talking, like, okay, maybe they're not, but yeah, other thoughts that you might have to that.
If you think about what emotions are, and that's a longer conversation, we won't go into that, but even just the basics of feelings and sensations, we have to ask ourselves, why am I so afraid of them? Why am I running away from them? There's a quote that says something along the lines of, emotions don't kill you. What you're numbing, with is what actually kills you. It's like, we're running away from our emotions, these feelings. But the analogy I often give my clients is like hunger. Hunger is a sensation similar to emotions in our body. Most of us are not running away from hunger. Why? Why do you think that is?
Well, because it tells us that we have a need that needs to be fulfilled, right? Otherwise, if we ignore that forever, then we're going to die.
Yeah. And now if we ignore it, it can actually grow. And then hunger does become extremely uncomfortable.
Yes.
So 2 main points with that is many times we don't run away from hunger, even though it's a sensation just like an emotion, because we've been taught what it is. And we've been taught it's a signal. And so once you feel your body, the sensation goes away. So number one, we haven't been taught. And then number two, we often don't address it. And so it becomes louder and louder. And then it really does become uncomfortable. So it's not the emotion that is the problem. It's how we've coped with them, actually haven't coped with them, that we don't address them. And when we don't address them, they grow, they grow, they grow. And then it's this huge mountain that seems insurmountable.
Now, let's take that one step further. Let's say that even after it became a big problem and you're super hungry, you still ignored it. Are there instances where eventually those hunger signals might actually go away because they've been ignored for so long? And could that be a problem?
Yeah. And, we go into this further about fasting and other things. But if we ignored it for so long, this is where PTSD comes to mind. It seems like it's no longer there, but the need is still there. Your hunger, your body needs fuel. That's where you mentioned you would die. So imagine life without emotions, without signals. I like to think about emotions as signals. It's the problem itself is not the emotion. It's how we respond to the signal. And if we ignore it, it does escalate. Or I like to use the analogy of a fire alarm where, what's the purpose of a fire alarm? It helps signal us if there's danger to smoke and possibly fire in the home. But let's say you have that annoying fire alarm. I think everyone's probably experienced this, that it's beeping or sounding when there's no fire.
Yes.
Do you get rid of the fire alarm?
No.
No. Some of my clients are like, yes. I'm like, no, you don't. What do you do?
Well, you have to make sure the fire alarm is responding appropriately to the right input or signals.
Yeah, you recalibrate it.
Yeah.
Either the battery's running low, something's happening. And so that's what emotions are. They're fire alarms. They help us navigate through life. And sometimes they seem off or sometimes they're unpleasant, but we don't get rid of the fire alarm, aka addictions or whatever we do to numb it. We instead recalibrate it. Make sure that we're fine-tuning it so that it signals just when we need, and then we listen to it.
Yeah, and that, it's funny because I was exactly thinking about along those lines, not the fire alarm analogy, but just thinking like, okay, so emotions are not bad, even some of the ones that we might want to call bad, but sometimes they might be responding, you might say, inappropriately or in the wrong way. And so another analogy I was thinking about is kind of like a dog, right? And if a dog is just like barking at every little sound and every little like cricket and everything, it's like, okay, that dog just needs to shut up, right? But should we shoot the dog? Not necessarily. Hopefully we can kind of retrain the dog, right? To be like, okay, this is what you're supposed to bark at. This is what you're not supposed to bark at. And then we can have a happier home and a happier neighbor.
This is the second time you've used the dog analogy. I think something's going on with your dog, Dr. Binus. But you're right. And that applies to a lot of things, and making sure that whatever the purpose of the thing is, we make sure that we train it accordingly. And one of the things that I feel so sad about is when so many of my clients feel ashamed about how they feel and how intensely they feel. And a big part of it, what makes the emotions bad, not the emotions themselves, what's the real problem is they were never taught.
Mm-hmm.
And if you were never taught to do something, how can you be expected to know how to do it?
Mm-hmm.
I sometimes ask my clients, like, were you taught to tie your shoe? It's like, yes. If you didn't, you wouldn't know today how to tie your shoe.
Yes.
I know I wouldn't shame you for that. Or, were you taught 2 + 2? Yes. But there's some people who don't know what 2 + 2 is. And the same thing applies to our emotions. If we were never taught, we won't know what to do with these feelings.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So would you say that actually all emotions are good? I mean,
Question mark? Yes. And I know before people start, running away with that, I think the progression here is often emotions are bad. Then we kind of go through emotions. Some are good, some are bad, right? We have happiness on the good category. We have anger on the bad or whatever. But we'll talk about how all emotions are good.
but if all emotions are good, how can some of them feel so bad?
Yes, that's true. And so part of that is if we don't know how to manage them,
Okay.
that's where they feel so bad. Hunger is good. It's a signal. But if we don't know how to manage it or respond to our need, then it definitely can grow to a point where it can feel unpleasant.
Okay. So do you want to delve into how these emotions are good? I don't know if you want to go down a list of different emotions.
Sure. Before we do that, let's just pause for a second and think about, okay, before we learn what they are and how good they are, is to really reflect on what's the deep ingrained belief that I have about emotion. So as people are driving or doing whatever they're doing, as they listen to us right now, like just take a moment. What's my belief about emotions? Like, what was I taught? What was I taught in my home? What was I taught culturally? Different cultures have different views.
Mm-hmm.
What was I taught religiously?
Well, can you give us maybe some examples of different beliefs that people might have about
Yes,
emotions?
and feel free to chime in. Emotions are weak. You're weak if you're too sensitive. That's another one. Emotions are weak. You're too sensitive, overreactive, dramatic. So what I often find is men generally, that culture, tend to get the weakness. Women tend to get the sensitivity and dramatic. And all of these really under the umbrella of emotions are bad. Different religions. So I often hear from a Christian perspective, oh, the heart is deceitful above all things. And they quote this to say emotions are bad. And really, if you think about different cultures, different families, it's different ways to communicate the same thing, that emotions are bad. Even, and this just, it makes me so sad when I hear parents, even with good intentions, say things like, a child is crying. Don't cry. Be a big boy. That sounds innocent. That sounds good. But what is that communicating to the child?
Yeah. So basically, you shouldn't be crying. If you want to grow up and be a big boy and eventually a man, then you just need to shut it down.
Yeah.
Right?
Emotions are bad. And it just boggles my mind because if you think about in that moment, oftentimes the kid has such a valid reason to be hurting. And instead of coming alongside the child and teaching them, modeling to them, wow, of course you're crying. You just got hit by little Bobby or whatever, right? It's like, of course, cry away. And a big part of this too is them learning about their body. Oh, when I cry, I release stress hormones from my tears. Like, this is good. My body needs this. And that wave comes up of sadness and hurt. And then as I express, it comes down. But if you say, don't cry, it stops that wave. And it's kind of like a dam that builds up that pressure. And then the kid tends to overreact or react in a different way later. And then we punish the child later for reacting in a way that was inappropriate, where it wasn't really, their fault after they've just repressed or suppressed their emotion early on.
So we need to make sure we're educating them about those stress hormones being released in the tears early on. But no, it's a good point. Now, some parents might be saying, well, But so we just turn them into crybabies. But I don't think that's what you're saying, right? You're saying, okay, yes, let them cry, but also teach them how to self-soothe. And of course, as the parent, we're coming in there to soothe them initially so that eventually they can learn how to do self-soothing, but we're not telling them, hey, you should just shut down your emotion,
Yeah.
right?
And a good just resource for that is The Whole Brain Child by Daniel Siegel, I believe. And he also wrote one, No Drama Discipline. And it basically talks about how to help children cope with the whole brain by using left and right brain. And it's a really good balanced approach. And it's actually really good to just learning about emotions because parents are afraid, am I just going to allow them to cry? And I think that's one of the fears of, not just of parents and children, but also of friends. If I validate or if I encourage, that's going to magnify the emotion. But that's not how emotion works. Emotion actually works that with validation and comfort, it soothes the brain, it calms the limbic system, and then it turns on the frontal lobe in a way that then the whole brain integration of putting the two parts of the brain that God created together so that they can be soothed.
But certainly you've met people that it seems like they just want that listening ear, and there's a secondary gain of hearing the validation and hearing the comfort, but then there's not a lot of progress. So how do we any thoughts on how we balance that, where we can validate whether it's our children, our friends, our patients, but at the same time, we're not kind of perpetuating saying like, yes, this is really the reward. Like, the more you, I don't know, complain, maybe I'll say, and that sort of thing, the more positive is. Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yes. We talk always in DBT about validating the valid, right? We're not talking about validating the invalid.
Okay.
And the power of this is when we validate the valid and we really get to the heart of the issue, the person actually does feel better and they do actually respond to that and don't continue to complain. Often people who complain a lot and just talk so much is because they haven't been heard. They haven't been soothed.
The core of the issues.
Yeah. And we could probably have another episode on that of like how to help people in those situations. Because there are different kind of components to the other variables too. But simply in that moment when there's a reason for that child or person to be experiencing that emotion, validating or acknowledging it. They say, name it to tame it, right? You name it, you acknowledge it, and that helps a person to calm that emotion.
Yeah, that's really helpful in having that healthy balance, right? And really, again, making the title of our episode, making friends with our emotions and realizing that they can be truly helpful. And it doesn't mean we just allow them to run amok, so to speak, right? We're not saying, okay, well, emotions can just control my life, but we want to give them their proper place.
There's a quote that says, emotions are meant to be indicators, not dictators. Right? And I think that summarizes, and the indicator part is what we have to focus on. How can it be my friend? How can it help me in life as I listen to it?
Yeah, so kind of like a flag or hey, something's going on over here. And then, okay, let me get closer and find out what is this emotion trying to tell me, right? And learning from that instead of being like, I don't want to experience it, don't want to feel it, don't want to deal with it. Let me just be happy all the time. And going back to kind of misbeliefs about emotions that we sometimes grow up with in our families, I think that's another common one that I've noticed is that, hey, we can be, and some families are very emotional, but only like more the positive emotions, right? But when it comes to sadness or like anger or something like this, then no, those are bad, and we should not even go there.
And I even try now in practice to not even use positive emotions or negative, more so pleasant or unpleasant. Because even in that language, we have these two categories, but what we'll see in a moment is it's not, positive, happy, joy, and these things, and then sadness and anger on the bad side. They all have purposes.
Yes.
And if we can learn what those purposes are and respond, not only are they your friends, but they're some of your best assets.
Okay, well, let's dive right into it then.
Yeah.
How are our emotions really good, even the ones that we might generally see as negative?
So going back to this as a signal. So try to remember these two components. They communicate to us and others and motivate us. So let's go through some of those negative, air quotes here, emotions and see how they communicate and motivate. So let's start with anxiety because that's the easiest one for people to identify.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think anxiety communicates?
Well, that there's potential danger.
Yes. And then it motivates us to,
Well, either fight against that danger or run away from the danger, typically.
yeah. And when we feel it,
But to do something, right?
exactly, motivate, action, right? Motion.
Emotion.
Exactly. So a lot of my clients are like, I feel it, I don't like it. Well, what is it communicating? I'm perceiving some sort of danger. Now, we'll come back to this, but let me just throw it in here. Sometimes that perception is wrong, but it's not the anxiety that's the problem, it's the perception. But let me just give an example. Like you're walking down the street, you see a snake, your body fills with that sensation of anxiety. You perceived communicates danger. It's going to motivate you to run away. But let's say you notice it's actually a stick, not a snake, right? It's not the anxiety that's the problem. It's your perception, your thought. Mm-hmm. And so we'll come back to that, but it's just anxiety in its pure state is a wonderful signal. Imagine life if we didn't have anxiety.
Yeah. Well,
that's scary.
It is scary. And it even reminds me of people's lives that don't have pain, for example.
Yeah.
Because, well, one of those examples is people that have leprosy. Mm-hmm. And what's the problem? Well, they don't feel pain. They don't know what's actually hurting them. And they eventually get infections and start losing parts of their body as a result. And so I think that kind of is similar.
No, it's a perfect example. Pain, a lot of people are like, oh, I don't like it. And so we're living in a society today that's numbing a lot of pain. And by doing that, they're not using it as a signal. The pain, just like anxiety, is a signal. It communicates something's wrong in our body and it's motivating us to do something about it. So great example. So that's anxiety. What about anger? What do you think anger communicates?
Again, it can be related to something being dangerous, especially boundary crossing, I think. When I know I tend to get angry if I feel like something unjust is happening or there's maybe I'm being threatened or my family is being threatened or something like that.
Yeah, I tend to just kind of summarize it in what you mentioned of like the injustice. Mm-hmm. Some sort of injustice is happening. It's communicating injustice. You see someone being beaten, that's maybe a child, or your body fills with anger. Mm-hmm. That's unjust. And then it motivates us to correct it.
Yes.
Imagine if we didn't have anger. Now, again, perception matters, right? Where a lot of people are angry about different things. But the anger built in our bodies is so helpful as a signal to make sure that we're addressing the injustice. Sadness. This one's a little bit harder for people. And these are it's not just one definition or one communication. There's different ones. But for the sake of time, I'll just mention sadness often communicates a loss of something of value. And then it motivates us as much as possible to regain it. Mm-hmm. Breakup happens. You're sad. Your body's like, is there any way possible that we could regain that relationship? And sometimes you can't. Or maybe a friendship. I have some people who are like, I'm so sad. I haven't heard from so-and-so for a year. Call them. Let that motivate you as you recognize, oh, I cherish that friendship. Mm-hmm. It's valuable to me.
Yes.
But we don't listen to our emotions. So we're just stuck in our living rooms, lonely or sad, and we're not taking the action appropriate to resolve the emotion.
Absolutely. I love that because, again, we're moving towards it. We're being curious rather than self-critical or judgmental. And we're saying, okay, what is this about? And how can I, in a healthy way, really attend to that issue and respond in an appropriate way? Because, like you said, it can be indicators of injustice, loneliness, things that need to be worked through. Maybe it's like, okay, well, I need to actually settle this situation with this person because I've done them wrong or they did me wrong. And so if we don't pay attention to those things, they can just stay covered up and cause all sorts of issues.
Yeah. Now, going to the more pleasant ones, as we term them, happiness. Imagine if we didn't have happiness. It communicates that we like something, whether like someone, like a job, and it's motivating us to do it more. Mm-hmm. So if some of our emotions are communicating, hey, be careful, don't do that. Others, they say we have different systems in our body, the threat system that these emotions are part of that help protect us. There's a reward system. Some of these emotions help you gain a reward to do it more, right? There's the soothing system where if you have these feelings of calm or serenity or safety, you want to be able to do those things more as well. Mm-hmm. And so without emotions, we wouldn't know how to navigate life.
Yes, absolutely. Now, what about, I'm going to play the devil's advocate a little bit here.
Please do.
What about some of these other, we tend to, I think I've tended to at least call them emotions, but maybe I'm misconstruing here, but things like resentment or lust. Like we talked about, anger can be very healthy and helpful. I think we'd all agree that God created healthy sexuality and all of this, but then, lust, a lot of people struggle with that, especially in today's society. So how can we, would we call those, well, I know we wouldn't call those healthy, right? So, but you're saying all emotions are healthy. So help me understand that a little bit.
So great questions. Resentment, if you break down the word resentment, and we have it at different podcasts, means it's from the root word resentir, right? To refeel. It's to refeel anger. So it's not even a, basic emotion, right? It's already a concept that's bigger than just the emotion itself. Yeah. So what makes it unhealthy, it's not the emotion itself, but choosing to refeel it. If you think about what we've been talking about, of we listen to the emotion, we take action, and then it's resolved. Resentment is not resolving it. Yeah. It's holding on to it and not taking the action necessary.
Which might be related to, of course, forgiveness perhaps, or
confronting,
having conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay.
And so here I am by myself, just ruminating on this anger, instead of, oh, what is this anger communicating? What is it motivating me to do? Which, if you think about it, I think some people don't like this approach because it puts a lot of choice and power on you. Mm-hmm. Instead of I just feel things and I'm just going to choose to not really choose. They're thinking that it's just, I feel it, and that's it. Versus, no, I have the choice with resentment to confront, to address, to forgive.
So it's more of our perception, what we're doing with that emotion, that then turns into the secondary, we might say, problem, if you will, the issue that is really more the unhealthy concept. Like you said, I don't even know if we want to call it full like emotion, even though that's, it feels. And, I think we could probably use the same principle even with lust too, right? Yeah. Where, okay, so sexuality and sexual feelings are in and of themselves bad, but it's how we're perceiving those, how we're processing those, what we're kind of doing with those.
Exactly. And I think this is one thing that we do similar to emotions with youth that's terrible. We overemphasize the dangers of lust, that we make people believe that those physical sensations are unhealthy. Mm-hmm. When God made you with those feelings, it's not the feelings themselves, it's what we do with them. That's the behavioral component, but also the thought behind it, right? Mm-hmm. I can have that feeling in the context of a healthy marriage, and that's beautiful. I tell the youth, I'm like, hey, God made you this way. You're starting to feel things as you grow. Those hormones are changing. That's a beautiful thing. Mm-hmm. Again, with the choice, you have a choice of where do I place those feelings? Mm-hmm. What do I do with them? Yeah. Do I reserve them as a beautiful gift for my partner one day? Do I realize, wow, this is a beautiful thing. My body is changing. And I would say this as a side point. One of Satan's strategies with emotions, but also with sexuality, is us not liking the body that God has given us. When it's a beautiful design to help us navigate through life, including with emotions.
Yeah. Wow. That's powerful. And I think it's so important, like you said, for us to really, especially with a lot of people, and I'm thinking especially in Christian circles where, purity and these sorts of things are highly esteemed, and rightly so, but that doesn't mean that we just like wall off anything which are God-given signals that our body is giving. It's how do we manage those in a truly pure, like God-given way that gives glory to Him and is actually a blessing to ourselves and those around us.
Yeah, exactly. So what we're emphasizing is the main culprit is not our emotions, it's our thoughts.
Yeah.
And if you think about, if we're fighting a villain, right, and we have the wrong villain, you're not going to solve the problem.
Yes.
And we've been fighting the wrong villain. We think it's our emotions, but it's our thoughts behind the emotions. And I think a good analogy of that is a fire, right? Where the flames were like, oh, I don't want to be burned. And well, the flames are good. You can keep warm. And what happens to a fire that you don't continue to fuel?
Well, yeah, it goes out. And so the problem is that there's still fuel.
Exactly.
That's why they make fire breaks and that sort of thing, right?
Our emotions are those flames.
Yeah.
You feel them, you experience them, they're gone. But if you refuel them with thoughts, like instead of saying, oh, that's a stick. No, that's a snake. I know it's a snake. And this is what happens with rumination. They say we have our emotions for 90 seconds. So my clients are like, no, I feel them a lot longer. Well, yeah, because you're renewing the subscription.
With the thought.
With the thought.
Okay.
And so you're fueling the fire. Every thought that you have, it's like a log. Or sometimes rumination and other things are like gasoline. Or just with panic attacks, you see this all the time. They're starting to feel the sensations. The sensations aren't bad. And then they start thinking, I'm going to die. I'm trapped, whatever it may be. And that's what makes the emotion and the panic feel terrible.
I'm having a heart attack.
Exactly. But it's not the emotion. It's not the sensation.
It's the thoughts.
It's the thoughts.
Yeah. So one other question before we start wrapping things up. The Bible again and again talks about do not fear, do not fear, do not fear. Fear not. I've heard time and time again, that's the most oft repeated command in the Bible.
I've heard it's like 365 days.
Yeah, that's
like you could have one for each day. Yeah.
So what would you say to that? Because we've been saying, okay, well, anxiety can actually be healthy and good, and those fear sensations, but here the Bible says so.
The Bible also says to fear, right? To fear God. So we have to have a balance here. It's always helpful to really study those in the context. And a lot of times also like the do not be anxious or be anxious for nothing. It's often talking about this worrying. And a lot of times the Bible and old language, it's not really emphasizing emotions as sensations. It is really talking about the mind, the thoughts. Even the heart is deceitful. It's not talking about the emotions. It's about the mind. And that's why when you study the Bible from a mental health lens, it really emphasizes thoughts above everything, renewing the mind, the thoughts of everything.
So it's more related rather than this idea of like we should never feel any kind of emotion as far as like the fear or the anxiety or this sort of thing. It's more God doesn't want us to believe that we are unsafe. He doesn't want us to believe that He's not going to be there for us and help us, and that we're going to be just on our own and this sort of thing, right? And so, and one thing that I often think about is the verse where David actually says, because when we think about courageous people in the Bible, David is one of the top 3, 4, 5 at least, right? And he writes, "When I am afraid, I will trust you." And I love that because I think that really speaks to what you're saying is like, there's times where any of us have those, and I love the Psalms because they're so like brutally honest, and you see the anger, you see the fear, you see all these rustlings, right? And so it's normal like for us to have these feelings, a spectrum of emotion that we see throughout the Bible, and yet bringing those things to God and then saying, okay, yes, I'm having these emotions. And it's not like God saying, no, you shouldn't have them. It's more of like, okay, you're having these emotions, but I want to correct your belief about what you're going through. I want you to have an accurate belief. things are going to be okay.
And it's so funny because you said, David's one of the most courageous. He's also the most emotional.
Yes, that's true, right?
We see that in the Psalms, and that also speaks to emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Our emotions are not the problem. It's our ability actually to learn about them and to bring them to God and make sure that we have correct perceptions and interpretations that lead us to pure emotions. And so that's one thing I want to emphasize is, yes, some emotions can seem bad, but it's not the emotions, it's making sure our thoughts are correct. A lot of PTSD is incorrect thoughts rooted in the past.
Mm-hmm.
How are our hormones? What's my sleep like? Because all of these things, our mind and our body are not, disconnected. They're connected. So sometimes the emotions can seem off, but it's not the emotions. It's the things that impact our emotions, our thoughts, our behaviors. Even if you think about how we care for our body, that I like to say you reduce the noise,
Yes.
Right? If you sleep well, this happens with kids. You see this all the time. They get a good nap, they're less emotional, right? And then what we help them do is then manage those pure emotions that come up as signals for them.
Or if I feed my dog and
Exactly.
and also if I'm taking the time to pet him and that sort of thing, then he's going to be a happier dog and not barking so much. So
exactly.
Yes, I will work on training my dog.
And what's fascinating? There's a lot of research studies that show your view of emotions directly impact your experience of emotions. So I don't have time to quote all of them, but basically less depression, less anxiety, happier emotions, more connection, just by simply viewing emotions in a positive light, as well as the belief that you are in control of your emotions, not that your emotions are in control of you.
Well, thank you so much, Katie. I think this is not only thought-provoking, but really practical for each of us to really give some consideration to how we can view our emotions differently, truly as our friends, as our helpers, as things that can help us to understand more about ourselves, more about the world around us, more about our relationships, including our relationship with God, and really grow in a healthy way and become more mentally sound. Anything else that you want to add before we close?
Just as a reminder, one simple thing that we can do is when we feel an emotion next, what does it communicate? What does it motivate?
I like that. Keep it simple. What does it communicate? What does it motivate? And let it really move us towards healthy thoughts, healthy choices, and a healthier life. Thank you so much, Dr. Katie. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like and subscribe. Your engagement will help us reach more people who need encouragement. To hear more episodes, learn about our other mental health resources, or support us financially, visit thebrainpeoplepodcast.com.